Gion was elbow-deep in a coolant manifold when the war started. She didn't know it was a war yet. She thought it was a Tuesday. The Kareth 7 station hummed around her, that low metallic groan that older deep space platforms made when the hull expanded and contracted with temperature cycles. She'd learned to sleep through it after the first week. Now, 6 months into her posting as a systems engineer on humanity's most remote diplomatic outpost, she barely noticed it at all. What she noticed was that the secondary coolant line had been leaking for 3 days and nobody had filed the maintenance request properly. So here she was, in a crawl space that smelled like burnt copper and someone's forgotten lunch, fixing it herself. Yeah, she muttered to nobody. 3 engineering degrees, and I'm the one who actually shows up. The line had a stress fracture about 4 centimeters from the coupling joint. She'd seen worse. She squeezed a bead of thermal sealant along the crack, pressed a micro clamp over it, and held it steady for the count of 60 while the sealant cured. Her hand cramped around the 40th second. She ignored it. The station's emergency alert system went off at exactly second 57. She dropped the clamp. The alert wasn't the normal 3-tone chime for docking incidents or medical calls. This was the flat, continuous tone she'd only ever heard in drills. Red band emergency. External threat. Gion grabbed the clamp back, held it for the final 3 seconds with her teeth gritted, then backed out of the crawl space as fast as she could. Her knee caught the edge of the access panel. She cursed, limped, kept moving. The corridor outside was already loud with running footsteps. Lieutenant Gao appeared at the far end looking like she hadn't slept in a day, which was accurate because she hadn't. Park, you need to see this. What's Sketh Fleet? 12 vessels. They dropped out of transit 300,000 kilometers from the station, and they not answering hails. Gion knew about the Sketh. Everyone on Kareth 7 knew about the Sketh. The diplomatic mission existed partly because of them. A Covenant species collective that had first encountered human expansion 11 years ago, had spent 9 of those years in cautious, painstaking negotiation, and had spent the most recent 2 years in what the diplomatic corps called productive ambiguity, which was the official term for, we have no idea if this is going well. The Sketh were large. They communicated through layered vibrational frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't replicate without machine assistance, and they had a particular cultural sensitivity around silence. In Sketh's social structure, silence was agreement. Silence was submission. You did not go quiet in front of a Sketh unless you meant it. The human diplomatic team had read those briefings. They had then spent 2 years sending detailed, wordy communiques, careful not to leave pauses. 3 weeks ago, humanity's automated deep space relay network had experienced a cascade failure. For 11 days, the network had been silent. No signals, no chatter, just empty frequencies. Standing in the observation deck and watching 12 Sketh warships hold formation on the display screen, Gion began to understand what 11 days of human silence had probably looked like from the other side. Has anyone explained the relay failure? She asked. Lieutenant Gao's expression said everything. We've been trying to reach the diplomatic team on Deck 4, Gao said. Ambassador Reyes is in medical appendix. His deputy is currently attempting to operate the translation array, and the user interface is apparently different from the training simulations. Gion finished. He keeps getting the harmonic modulator backwards. Gion rubbed her face with her non-sealant-covered hand. I know that system. I ran maintenance on it last month. She paused. I'm an engineer, not a diplomat. The Keth have now been waiting for 22 minutes without a response. Gion closed her eyes. 22 minutes of silence. She was already moving toward Deck 4. Deputy Ambassador Ferraro was a kind, earnest man from Naples who had spent 15 years studying Sketh linguistics and who was, at this moment, holding the harmonic modulator upside down. To be fair to him, the manual hadn't been clear about which end was the input node. Gion noticed this within approximately 4 seconds of entering the translation suite. The node with the amber ring goes toward the emitter, she said, crossing the room and taking the device from him without asking permission. She flipped it, reconnected it, and watched the signal alignment meter climb from 17% to 89%. Oh, Ferraro said. It should work now. What are you trying to say? I'm trying to tell them that our silence was a technical failure, that we didn't intend, that it wasn't meant to be a, He gestured vaguely. A declaration of submission. Right. Gion looked at the translation interface. She'd spent a month on this system, learning its maintenance quirks. She knew, for instance, that the frequency buffer sometimes clipped on mid-register outputs and needed a manual compensator setting, which the diplomatic staff had never been told about because it was technically an engineering note, not a diplomatic one. She opened the compensator panel on the side and adjusted it. The signal steadied. Ferraro began speaking. The Sketh didn't answer. The 12 ships held their positions. Ferraro spoke again, more carefully, running through the standard acknowledgement protocols. Gion watched the signal readouts. The transmission was going out clean. She could see the reception confirmation. The signal was reaching the Sketh fleet. They were receiving it. They were choosing not to respond. What does that mean? She asked quietly. Ferraro sat down heavily in his chair. In their structure, it could mean they're deliberating. It could mean they've already decided something and they're waiting for a specific response from us first. He pressed his fingers together. Or it could mean the deliberation is over. The station's defense coordinator, a tightly wound woman named Seo Hyunmin who Gion had met exactly twice, appeared in the doorway. The Sketh fleet has changed formation. They've gone from a dispersal pattern to a convergence approach. Convergence, Ferraro said. It wasn't a question. They're moving toward the station. The next 30 minutes were, in Gion's private ranking of her worst experiences, comfortably in the top 5. She stayed at the translation array because nobody told her to leave and someone needed to keep the compensator stable. Ferraro sent message after message. The Sketh ships kept moving closer. Seo Hyunmin paced. Someone brought coffee that nobody drank. The station's automated defense systems primed themselves, which everyone tried very hard to pretend wasn't happening. Then the translation array picked up an incoming signal. It was dense, layered. Ferraro went pale. What does it say? Gion asked. Ferraro was quiet for too long. Ferraro, what does it say? It's from a single vessel. Not the command ship, a secondary vessel. The signal pattern is. He trailed off, checking references on his display. This is unusual. It's a personal frequency signal, not a fleet band. It's one individual, not an official transmission. He looked up. They're asking specifically for the station engineer who adjusted the translation array 4 minutes ago. Gion's brain stopped briefly. They could detect that. Sketh sensing arrays are designed to perceive fine vibrational changes. They heard you adjust the compensator. They recognized it as a distinct signature. Technically, Ferraro looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. They want to speak with you. There was a long pause. Tell them, Gion said, that I'll need a minute. She used that minute to wipe the coolant sealant off her hands with a cloth she found in someone's drawer and to think very hard about whether this constituted a terrible idea. She concluded that it probably did. She also concluded that she was the only person currently available who both knew the translation system well enough to run it without dropping the signal and who had, apparently, already made a Sketh notice her. She sat down in the operator's seat. The individual on the other end of the signal had a name that translated into human hearing as a series of low-frequency tones, which the translation system rendered approximately as Vokith Array. Whether that was a name or a title or something else entirely was unclear. What was clear was that Vokith Array Sketh was precise and deliberate, each tone placed carefully, with none of the cascade speech of the fleet command signals she'd overheard. The translation system converted it to text on her screen. Ferraro leaned over her shoulder and translated the syntax into something coherent. The message was essentially, you altered the resonance of your communication device. Why? Gion thought about this. She typed her response into the system. Ferraro started to suggest a diplomatic phrasing. She typed what she actually meant instead. The buffer was clipping on mid-frequencies. It was losing part of the signal. I adjusted it so the transmission would be accurate. There was a pause. Then, you were correcting an error. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. She found herself leaning forward slightly, which was ridiculous, because the screen wasn't going to change faster just because her face was closer to it. Your species was silent for 11 days. Our relay network failed. It was a technical error, the same kind as the buffer clip. Something broke and nobody noticed fast enough. She felt Ferraro's hand briefly on her shoulder, which she interpreted as either approval or nervousness, and she see. I'll tell which. We interpreted your silence as submission, as the end of your claim to this region. I understand why. We should have found a way to tell you what happened. You could not. Your network was broken. Yes. We should have had a backup. We didn't. That's on us. There was a longer pause this time. Gion counted 17 seconds. She didn't mean to count. She just noticed it. Your word. On us. Responsibility acknowledgement. Yes. Without deflection. Right. The response that came after that was longer. Ferraro took 3 minutes to fully translate it, frowning as he worked. When he finished, he read it aloud twice because he wasn't sure he had it right. The Sketh individual named Vocathare had said, I am the fleet's resonance interpreter. My function is to determine the meaning in signals that are unclear or ambiguous. I have been arguing for the past 11 days that your silence did not have the quality of submission. It had the quality of absence. Like a broken string, not a string that had been put down. I was overruled. I want you to understand that I argued against this. Gion sat with that for a moment. They have someone, she said slowly, whose job is basically to read signals and figure out what people actually mean, and that person thought we weren't submitting, just broken, and nobody listened to them. That's approximately correct, Ferraro said. That's deeply frustrating. Yes. She typed, I'm glad you argued against it. For what it's worth. The response, it is worth something. Can I ask you something that is outside diplomatic protocol? She glanced at Ferraro. He gave a microscopic shrug that meant he had no idea what the correct answer was. She turned back to the screen. Yes. You fixed the broken thing before speaking. Why? The communication was more urgent. Why repair the equipment first? It was such a strange question that she almost laughed. Instead, she thought about it properly, because it deserved a proper answer. If the equipment's broken, what you say doesn't get through right. The words leave, but they arrive wrong. I'd rather say less and have it arrive correctly than say a lot and have it lost in a bad signal. The pause before the answer was the longest yet. 23 seconds. I have been telling my fleet commanders something similar for 11 days. She put her hands in her lap and looked at the screen. I know, she typed. The fleet didn't leave. That would have been too clean an ending for something that had spent 11 days building toward war. But it stopped moving. The convergence pattern dissolved back into a holding position, and Co Hyunmin exhaled so loudly that everyone in the room heard it, and then looked embarrassed about it. What followed was 3 days of actual, official diplomatic communication. Ambassador Reyes conducted it from his medical bay with a tablet propped against his hospital tray, which he complained about constantly. Ferraro led the formal sessions. The translation array ran clean throughout. Gion adjusted the compensator twice more when she noticed the signal drifting, and each time, the array steadied. Each time, there was a brief pause in the Sketh response, just long enough for her to wonder if Vocathare was on the other end, noticing. On the second day, a message came through on the personal frequency signal rather than the fleet band. Ferraro noticed it and carefully didn't say anything. He just moved away from the operator's seat and let her sit down. The message was, the diplomatic sessions are proceeding. I wanted to tell you that my original assessment has been formally entered into fleet record. That it was correct does not matter as much as that it was documented. Does it feel good that it was documented? A pause. Yes. Unexpectedly. It is a small thing. Small things count. Do humans have many situations like this, where the small things are more significant than the large ones? Constantly, she typed and decided not to elaborate because she suspected the specific example she was thinking of, fixing a coolant line at 6 in the morning while a war started without her, was probably too strange to translate cleanly. I have been studying human communication patterns, Vocathare sent, for the past 3 years, as part of my function. Your species uses a great deal of silence as well. Inside your own communications with each other. We don't always mean submission by it either. I suspected. The quality is different. Your silences have texture. Wait, they are not the absence of sound. They are the sound of thinking. Gion read that twice. There was something uncomfortably accurate about it, and she found herself reacting to being accurately seen by an alien she'd never met in person the same way she always reacted to that, which was to immediately want to change the subject. What does your silence mean? She typed. When you go quiet. The response took a while. Usually that I am deciding whether the thought is true before I speak it. That's almost the same as thinking. Almost. On the third day, the formal diplomatic sessions produced a provisional framework for resuming negotiations, a temporary communication protocol backup system to prevent relay silence incidents from being misread, and a term for the whole event that the diplomatic corps would spend years arguing about. The Sketh fleet began to redistribute back into a dispersal pattern, which Seo Hyunmin said was a positive sign, and Ferraro said was a sign of de-escalation, and Jion said was a relief. The personal frequency signal came again that evening. The fleet will depart tomorrow. I wanted to tell you directly. I know. Thank you for telling me anyway. I am not supposed to have developed a communication with a human engineer during a diplomatic incident. I'm not supposed to be the one running the diplomatic communications. I'm maintenance. And yet, she agreed. I don't know the proper way to close this, Vocathare sent. In Sketh Prot. Okal, we don't have a separation acknowledgement for this category. Neither do we, really. What do your people do when they don't have the right words? She thought about this for a while. She thought about the coolant line and the clamp and the count of 60. She thought about holding something steady until it cured. Usually we just say something imperfect and mean it. A pause. I'm glad it was you. Who adjusted the array? Who was in the room? She read it 3 times. Me too, she typed. The fleet departed the following morning at 0600 station time. Jion watched the sensor readouts from the engineering bay while doing actual engineering work, which was a maintenance check on the secondary power coupling she'd been meaning to run for a week. The 12 Sketh vessels disappeared from the long-range sensors one by one as they entered transit, and when the last one vanished, she stayed looking at the now-empty sensor field for approximately 10 seconds longer than was necessary. Then she went back to the power coupling. Life on Kareth 7 returned to its ordinary rhythms, which were not very rhythmic. Ambassador Reyes recovered from his appendix situation and filed a report on the incident that was 4,000 words long and technically mentioned Jion twice, both times as the engineering staff who maintained the translation array. She read the report because Ferraro forwarded it to her. She didn't mind the description. It was accurate. She did mind, slightly, that the report didn't mention Vocathare's argument or the formal fleet record documentation. But diplomatic reports had their own logic, and she wasn't a diplomat. 3 weeks after the fleet departed, she got a message through an unusual channel. Not the station's diplomatic communications, not a personal message to her crew account, but through the engineering maintenance network, tagged as a technical inquiry about the Kareth 7 translation array's compensator specifications. Ferraro found her in the co-writer outside the engineering bay. He had a very careful expression on his face. You have a technical inquiry from a Sketh frequency interpreter requesting the specifications of the translation array compensator you adjusted. That's very specific. Very, Ferraro agreed. He held out his tablet with the message. I believe it may be the only way that individual could contact you through a channel that is technically within their operational function. Jion looked at the message. The technical inquiry was meticulous. It asked about the compensator in precise detail. It also, at the end, asked a question that had nothing to do with compensators. I have been thinking about what you said, that you'd rather say less and have it arrive correctly than say a lot and have it lost in a bad signal. I have used this principle in 3 fleet communications since our conversation. It has been effective. I thought you should know. She borrowed Ferraro's tablet and typed a response through the maintenance network channel, because that was apparently what they were doing. How are the 3 communications going? The response came back faster than the technical channel should have allowed for, better than expected. One led to a significant correction in a navigational report. Another prevented a resupply miscount that would have been detected in 4 months. The third is ongoing. Early results are promising. Good, she wrote. That's good. How are you? She stared at that question for a moment. The translation of Sketh frequency speak into written human text was an imprecise process, she knew. Things could get filtered. Things could get added. And yet the question felt exactly like what it was. A small question dropped into a technical channel because it was the available channel. Fine, she wrote. Working. I fixed a power coupling yesterday. I'm going to fix a ventilation fan tomorrow. It's possible I will one day address the heat variance in Section C, but I've been saying that for 2 months. She almost deleted it and wrote something less meandering. She sent it instead. The response, Section C has a heat variance? The tertiary thermal exchange is slightly misaligned. It's not dangerous, just annoying. The temperature fluctuates by about 4 degrees over 6 hours. That would affect the material integrity of the surrounding infrastructure over extended periods. Yes. Is it on a maintenance schedule? Technically no. It's on my personal mental list of things I should do before they become someone else's emergency. A pause. I also have such a list. Everyone does. I hadn't considered that. I thought it was a personal organizational deficiency. She snorted. Ferraro, who was still standing nearby pretending to look at something else, glanced over at the sound. Everything all right? Fine. Technical consultation. She handed him back his tablet and went to get her own, because this conversation had graduated from borrowed equipment territory to having its own account territory. She messaged Ferraro from her own account. Can I have access to the maintenance technical channel for interspecies engineering inquiries? Ferraro's response came back in 40 seconds. I'll put in the paperwork. I'm noting the stated purpose as ongoing translation array diagnostics. That works. Gion. Yes. I'm glad you fixed the compensator. She put her tablet down on her workbench and looked at the ventilation unit in Section C, which she could see from here, and which was blowing slightly too warm air at a frequency she'd learned to filter out the same way she'd learned to filter the hull groans. She picked the tablet back up. Me too, she sent back. The technical consultations continued over the following months. They had a form. They always started with an actual engineering or communications question, because Vocathare's function within the Sketh fleet was signals interpretation and Gion's was systems maintenance, and there was a real and genuine overlap between those things that neither of them had expected to find. Gion learned more about Sketh communication infrastructure than she'd ever anticipated knowing. Vocathare apparently learned enough about human station maintenance to start including thermal exchange alignment in their fleet's signals room maintenance checks, which was a detail Gion found unexpectedly charming. Between the technical content, there were other things. The conversations were slow because the channel wasn't designed for real-time dialogue, and the translation software wasn't perfect, and sometimes Vocathare would send something that arrived slightly wrong, and they'd spend several exchanges figuring out what had been meant. Gion found she didn't mind this the way she'd expected to. There was something that made sense to her about the process, the patient back and forth of getting the meaning right, of not assuming the first translation was accurate, of checking. She told Vocathare this once. I'm used to things that need calibration before they work right. The answer, is that how you see this? I see it as worth calibrating. A pause that lasted most of a day, which was normal for the channel, and which she'd stopped interpreting as hesitation and started understanding as the texture Vocathare had described, the sound of thinking. I told my fleet commander that I have established an ongoing technical exchange with a human engineer. He asked if it was useful. I said yes. He asked if it was likely to continue. I said yes. He asked nothing further. I think he assumed it was about array compensators. It started that way. Many things start one way, Vocathare sent. And the moment of change is usually not dramatic. Usually it is something small. A calibration. A decision not to delete what you actually meant and send something cleaner instead. Gion read that message while eating a slightly stale nutrition bar at her workbench at 2,100 hours, surrounded by the smell of metal and the warmth from the Mesa. Linear thermal exchange she still hadn't fixed, and the low groaning of the hull doing its nightly expansion cycle. She was tired. She had grease under one fingernail that the hand cleaner hadn't fully removed. She had 4 items on her maintenance schedule for the next morning. She typed, I didn't know you noticed that. That I kept the Messier version. I am a resonance interpreter. I noticed the difference between a signal that went through one mind and a signal that went through 2. The one that was sent and the one that was checked before sending. Yours always feel like one. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. I haven't decided if it is wise. I think it might be both. She looked at her workbench. She looked at the ventilation unit visible at the far end of the section. She made a decision. She picked up her toolkit, walked over to Section C, and spent 40 minutes properly realigning the tertiary thermal exchange. It wasn't dramatic. The temperature stabilized over the next 2 hours. Nobody noticed except the environmental monitoring system, which logged the adjustment at 2,143 hours, and her, and possibly Vocathare if she happened to mention it. She mentioned it. I fixed the Section C heat variance. The response, the next morning. How? She explained the realignment process. Vocathare asked 3 technical questions. She answered them. Then, why tonight? It was on my list long enough. You decided it was time. I decided not to wait for it to become someone else's emergency. The longest pause yet. Longer than 23 seconds. She went to the translation array and ran a maintenance diagnostic. Not because it needed one, but because her hands wanted to be doing something. The diagnostic came back clean. The compensator was aligned. The signal was clear. When the message came back, it was, "There is a Sketh concept that I don't have a translation for. I've been trying to find one. The closest I can construct in human terms is the decision to stop letting something important wait on the list." What's the concept called? In our frequency speak, it is a specific tone. Sustained. Deliberate. Not announcing, but settling. Like a note that has found its correct register. She set down the diagnostic tool. "We don't have a word for it either," she sent. "Maybe we need one. Perhaps, Vocathore sent, we could name it something. For practical use. What would you name it?" Another long pause. She didn't count the seconds. She was done counting. "Something that sounds like a repair," Vocathore sent. "Something that sounds like the moment the signal clears." She stood in the translation suite on Kareth, 7 in the middle of an ordinary morning, and the station groaned around her in its familiar way. And somewhere on a ship currently charting a route in deep space, a Sketh frequency interpreter who had argued against a war for 11 days and won no one's attention except her own was waiting for her to respond. She typed, "I'll think about it. Tell me the next item on your list." The response came back in the time it took her to walk back to her workbench and pick up her toolkit for the morning's work. "You're on it." She stood still for a moment. In the warm metallic air of Section C, now 4 degrees more correct than it had been 12 hours ago. Then she smiled at her toolkit, because nobody was watching, and started her day.